Hi, I'm Jim Clark, Visual Arts Manager at Hopkins Center for the Arts. We're here speaking with Jeanne Aaron about her exhibition, Silk Paintings and Batiks. Jeanne, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your lovely work with us and our community. I was going to ask, what is the inspiration for the show, but it seems rather apparent. There's dynamite images of flowers. Why the flowers?
That's a good question. So the reason is that I love the color and the design of flowers. And I attempted to paint flowers on canvas with oil paint. And the result was very heavy and opaque. And at the time I had a friend who was teaching batik to her middle school students, and she gave me some silk and let me try the technique, and I just really loved the technique and the result, and it was just very appropriate for flowers because the silk paints were very vibrant colors, and the silk had a sort of translucency that lent itself to the subject very well. Sure. So that's the reason I chose to paint them in that particular, in this particular medium, silk painting. And the reason for the flowers is that I love flowers and the color and design that they have. And some of them have a rather special meaning to me. Like, for example, water lilies. I do a lot of canoeing and kayaking and go on trips to the boundary waters, and I love the water lilies, the way they open and close. So they're somewhat symbolic to me as well. Sure. And the other reason is that living in Minnesota with our really long winters that are very colorless, I enjoy painting with really bright color on the silk sure. And creating designs. Yeah. So that's
it's a way to stretch summer longer.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. You talk about the water lilies having particular personal significance, and that it's, is it fair to say, a reminder of camping trips? And what about the other flowers? What type of significance do they have to you?
Well, I love to draw, so I enjoy drawing flowers. Yeah. So for example, the daylilies, which just happen to be here, grow in my backyard. And so I draw them quite frequently and observe the opening and the closing at different times of the day. So they're just a flower that I enjoy painting because they're familiar and close.
Sure. I think you wrote about the Impatiens as well, and how your children enjoyed pinching the seed pods when they were young?
Yes.
Yeah.
And those are a flower that I plant on our property. We have a northern exposure, so they grow really well in the shade. Sure. And they're very, very colorful.
So you're also a gardener?
I wouldn't call me a gardener.
Okay.
But I do love flowers and appreciate them.
Sure, sure.
And I do sometimes visit gardens, yeah, okay. Like the Lake Harriet Gardens. Sure. And I photograph flowers in the gardens and sometimes sit and draw the flowers in various gardens. Sometimes in the dead of winter, I'll go to the conservatory in St. Paul and draw the flowers there.
So could you tell us a bit about your process? You speak of drawing, both from live observation, and it sounds like you also take photographs as reference?
Yes, both.
Okay.
So I always take photographs, especially now that it's so easy on a cell phone. Mm-hmm. And then when possible, I'll sit and draw flowers on location. And sometimes I'll work from the photographs. Often I'll have them blown up so that I can use sections of the photograph, just crop or go in on them. And I always use the macro attachment on my phone camera, so that I can get in close.
And have flowers been a fairly consistent subject matter throughout your artistic career, or is this relatively new?
This is relatively new. And my artistic career is very multifaceted. I've worked for a while doing three-dimensional animated film in clay. And my master's degree is actually in animation. And then I've done a lot of painting, just of life, of people, places. I've done ceramic sculpture, and none of that had any images of flowers. This is really since, for the last 10 years or so, being in Minnesota, that this began.
Wow.
And it's an art form that I only do on silk.
Really?
Yeah, that's the only material that I use. And I wouldn't normally just paint flowers, but on the silk, it's something that I see as like a design and working with the color and the fabric. So it's a medium that I've enjoyed working with. But this is a particular body of work. I'm not sure if I'll always do this. Maybe I'll do something else.
Right. Is there anything that you're working on right now, whether it's similar or different? What are you doing now?
Well, I do pastel portraits and pastel landscapes, and I study at the Atelier School of Fine Art, and I do this to keep up my drawing skills, and occasionally show them in their shows and exhibitions and other exhibitions, but usually only a few pieces at once.
Can you tell us a bit about the process of silk painting and batik, how they differ, and maybe point out some of those aspects?
Yes. So batik is an art form that began in Java, Indonesia, and it was used to create patterns and designs on fabric, primarily for clothing.
Sure.
And in batik, hot melted wax is used on the fabric before any color is added. And then after the hot melted wax is painted on to the fabric, it's dipped into dye, and the parts that are painted with the hot wax then are the color of the fabric, like white or off-white, whatever color it is, and then the rest of it takes on the color of the dyes. And then there's sort of a crackling effect from the batik. So that's batik. Silk painting is just painting with silk dyes directly on fabric. And so I've really combined the two mediums and used the wax to block out the color. And sometimes I'll work in stages, like using after I've drawn onto the fabric and pencil, applying the hot wax, and then working with the silk dyes one color at a time from the lightest to the very darkest. Sometimes reapplying the hot wax on very pale pastel colors to maintain them, and then going all the way through to the darkest colors. Silk painting is very similar to watercolor painting in that you need to preserve the light areas. So in watercolor, you leave the paper white, but in the way I do silk painting, I use the wax, the hot wax, to preserve the whites. And after I've completed an image, then the next part of the process is to iron off the wax. And this is done between 2 pieces of newsprint paper with a very hot iron, which also sets the dyes so they don't run. And then the wax comes off. Then at that stage, I look at the image again and go back in with color, like usually the darkest colors, and add some fine detail to finish the piece. The final part of finishing it is the sewing, because the edges have to be finished off either like with a rolled hem or sometimes just with a product that keeps the edges from fraying. And then they're suspended on a dowel which goes through a hem, and I do buttonholes for twine to go through to hang them. And then the bottom is weighted also with a dowel in a similar way. So there's quite a bit to the process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you devise the presentation technique yourself, or did you have a model off which you riffed or built? As far as the hem and the dowel, did you come up with that yourself, or was that something that you saw elsewhere?
So I looked at East Indian tankas and Asian tankas, and I observed the way they were hung, often with a wooden dowel and twine, and then I tried to emulate that, and then adjusted.
Okay.
According to how they hang. And because they're fabric and I don't frame them, having them hang nicely is very critical.
Sure.
So usually I finish off all the sewing and hang them up and observe how they hang.
And then tweak and make adjustments.
Right.
You know. We have them displayed on the gallery wall, as is our process, but I believe that you've presented them in other manners as well. In front of windows, for instance, is that?
Oh yes, that's true. I did have one show that I was in at the Textile Center, and at that show, one of the water lilies batiks was displayed in the window of the Textile Center, so as you walked up, you could see it from the outside, which I thought was a really nice way to display it. They can also be displayed hanging from a ceiling as a banner.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a few ways they can be displayed.
So are you saying they read just as well from both sides?
They do. Yeah. The light passes through them, so you can see the image from both directions equally.
While you're working on them, do you work from both sides, or is it primarily you're working on one side and it happens to work out that it looks good from both sides?
Yeah, I just work on one side, but because the dyes penetrate through, both sides look the same. But I actually have never flipped them over to work on the reverse side. It just always happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you mentioned drawing and pastel, and you work in a number of mediums. Process-wise for these, do you start with an idea, and then do you draw it out and develop it through drawings, or are you working directly on the silk from the start? How does that work?
I start with an idea and photographs and drawings, and then from those I simplify and come up with a design. And then once I've established the composition of the design, which is just a very simple pencil drawing, then I enlarge it to the size of the piece of silk that I'm working on, and then I draw it, sometimes just freehand onto the fabric, or I could actually transfer it.
Are your working drawings the same scale as the banners, so the transfer would be kind of direct, or do you have to scale up from your drawings?
Usually I scale up from the drawings. The drawings are sketches, just working out ideas and composition, and then I blow up the drawings onto paper the size of the batik. So the designs for the batiks are the same size as the batiks, and if I'm transferring them, then I can just use like a piece of transfer paper to put them on. But sometimes I'll just freehand the drawing onto the batiks.
When you're working out composition, it sounds like you're working that out in the drawing. So I imagine that you've got either a number of flowers in life there in the studio, or some of your photographs from the field. And I think many might assume that you were working out the composition by cropping photographs to find that, but it sounds like you're reorganizing elements from in the drawing. So you're using maybe multiple references and then reorganizing through drawing versus simply cropping a photograph you took. Is that true?
So it's both.
Okay.
So sometimes one and sometimes the other. And often when I work on a batik for a while, I'll go back to the original photograph. And a lot of times it's to see, okay, what was this background, and where are the lights and the darks? Sure. Because they change so much from the original photograph and original drawings that that it helps sometimes when I'm at the end of the process to go back to the very beginning to create the best design.
And you spoke about using the macro lens on your camera's phone, and that's getting really close, blowing up the image. It reminds me of, say, maybe Georgia O'Keeffe. Is she an influence or an inspiration?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. I love her work and her choice of subjects. She's done, I'm not sure how many, but I think many, maybe even hundreds of paintings of flowers. Yeah. And she uses cropping of photographs and also macro photography. And she's very interested in the natural designs in flowers and other subjects as well. So yes, I am influenced by her work. Although I don't think that I copy it. It's just that I like her techniques and her choice of subject matter.
For sure.
Yeah.
Are there other artists that you gain inspiration from?
Yeah, definitely. For this particular medium, silk painting and batik, I'm very influenced by Claude Monet's water lily studies, which also he did countless paintings of. And I've had the experience of seeing many of them in New York City displayed. And I think we even have some here in Minnesota. So, so he's definitely an influence. Sure. And sort of the peaceful tranquility of his paintings is something that I admire. And then I'm also influenced by Vincent van Gogh. And what I like about his work is a sort of an animated quality of being alive. I like his sunflowers and some of his paintings of trees. They seem to be just almost as if you could reach out and touch them, kind of swirling and moving.
Yeah.
So I like the gesture that he gets in his paintings.
Sure. And it's fascinating that that work gets to that point because it's not particularly objectively representational or naturalistic. That sense of life, as you indicated, is coming from the gesture and the swirling brushwork. That's fascinating. Yeah.
Yes, and each one of these batiks goes through a process, and you know, in the end, it's very different from the original photograph or drawing, and it sort of takes on its own life and becomes a design.
Is that always your intention, that you get to some new place?
It is. You know, I like each one to be different, and they really are all different. And I'll use different dyes and different types of silk for each one, depending on the desired result. But as I said, I often have no idea what the result is going to be.
Jeanne, where did you learn batik and silk painting?
Well, I remember I did one batik as a young teenager, sure. So I must have learned it in my high school art class. Yeah. I have a friend who does batik with her middle school students, yeah. And silk painting. And she taught me a few basic techniques, sure. And then I took it from there. So my way of doing silk painting and batik may not be traditional. It's something that I just developed and came up with on my own. And fantastic. I try, it's trial and error a lot.
Dynamite. And Jeanne, I know you teach drawing. And do you teach other subjects as well?
No, I just teach drawing to adults, mm-hmm. And to children. Any age can take my classes. Sure. But I also work with children 5 years old and under, teaching an art program in a school. So I enjoy teaching people of all ages, and I love to see the creative results. Yeah. Yeah, my adult students always tell me they can't draw, and that's how it always starts out. And I know that they can. It's very much a learned skill, but needs to be broken down into baby steps, sort of like taking piano lessons. Sure. And once you go through enough of the steps, you can draw. So I really enjoy teaching and having students continue to draw after they've taken my classes. A lot of them take it up as a hobby.
Sure. Would you consider teaching silk painting or batik?
Well, as I said, I was just asked to, so I've been thinking about how I would do it. But it actually would have to start with drawing and design, because you have to have like somewhat of a plan, especially for someone else to help you.
Sure, sure. Is it a fairly complex process to learn?
Well, in a way, I don't think it's that complicated, but there's a whole process. So there are steps, and it's quite a long process, so it would require a lot of patience.
What is next for you?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't totally know. But as for this body of work, I do plan on having future exhibits. This particular exhibit is the third that I've had of this group of silk paintings and batiks, and the largest. I had an exhibit at the Arboretum last fall, and in the winter at a gallery in Robbinsdale called the Robin Gallery. So I do plan on future exhibits of batiks, and I do plan on creating more silk paintings and batiks. But as I said, I work in different mediums, so it is possible I do something completely different, and I don't know exactly what.
When you work in different mediums, is it that like one day you may be doing silk painting, and on another day you might be drawing, and another day you might be painting in oil? Or is it pretty sustained periods of focus on the one medium, and then maybe you hit a wall and you move on to something else for a little bit? How does that work?
So I just work in one or maybe two mediums at a time, just because I don't have enough time in the day. So for example, for a while I worked as a ceramic artist. And when I did that, I only primarily worked with clay. And another period of time, I worked as a three-dimensional animator, and that was totally what I did, and I worked with a crew. And always continued drawing, but didn't work in the other mediums. So at the moment, I'm doing the silk paintings and batiks, and as I said, I do pastel portraits and landscapes and drawings, and those are to keep up my skills. I sometimes put them in exhibitions, but I haven't tried to show them as a complete body of work.
Sure.
But the silk paintings and batiks I felt needed to be displayed in order to really appreciate, like the idea of having more than one, so that the colors and the designs sort of play off of each other, and that they can be viewed as a group. I feel like it makes each one of them stronger to be seen as a whole.
And where else might folks see your work? Do you have a website?
Oh, I do have a website. So my web address is jeanneaaron.com.
And are you on social media at all?
Not at all.
All right. Good deal. Well, Jeanne, thank you so much for sharing your work with us and our community.
Well, thank you for interviewing me, and thank you for this opportunity to exhibit at Hopkins Center for the Arts. I've enjoyed this show and meeting you as well.
Dynamite. We were speaking with Jeanne Aaron about her exhibition Silk Paintings and Batiks, on display in the second floor lobby gallery through June 18th, 2022.